I found a baby on my doorstep. 20 years later, I discovered his true identity. Margaret Wilson was getting ready for bed when she heard a faint cry coming from her front door. It was almost 11 at night in Annapolis, and the light rain that had been falling for hours had finally stopped. When she opened the door, her heart nearly stopped. There, in a wicker basket lined with a light blue blanket, lay a newborn baby. The child was fast asleep, tiny fists clenched, his peaceful face illuminated by the warm light from inside the house. Margaret looked up and down the dark street, but saw no one, only wet leaves on the ground and the silence of the night. "Oh my God," she whispered, kneeling beside the basket. The baby couldn't have been more than a few days old. Beside him, there was only an extra diaper and a bottle of still warm milk. No note, no explanation. Margaret, 45 years old and widowed for 3 years, felt her chest tighten. She carefully picked up the basket and stepped inside, closing the door behind her. In the well-lit living room, she examined the child more closely. It was a boy with rosy skin and a few strands of dark hair. He breathed calmly, oblivious to the abandonment he had just endured. Tears streamed down Margaret's face. How could anyone leave such a helpless little thing like this? "What am I going to do with you, little one?" she murmured, gently touching the baby's face. Her first instinct was to call the police, but it was late, and she knew the child would be taken to an overcrowded shelter. She decided that, at least for tonight, she would care for him. Tomorrow she'd figure out what to do. She prepared a small space in the guest room, improvising a crib with pillows. The baby woke up crying from hunger, and Margaret prepared the bottle with the milk she'd found in the basket. As she fed him, she couldn't stop thinking about the desperate mother who had made this choice. The next morning, Margaret woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. She had spent the night awake, alternating between feeding him and soothing him when he cried. Looking at that innocent little face, something inside her shifted. "You need a name," she whispered. "How about Ethan? It's the name I would have given the child I never had." Margaret had tried for years to get pregnant with her late husband, Richard, but it never happened. Now at 45, life had given her this child in the most unexpected way. Was it a sign? She decided to go to the police station, but first stopped by the house of her best friend, Dorothy, who lived 2 streets away. Dorothy, a 68-year-old retired nurse, nearly dropped her coffee cup when she saw Margaret with the baby. "Margaret. Wilson, what is this? Where did this child come from?" Margaret told her everything from the moment she heard the cry to her decision to care for him overnight. Dorothy examined the baby with a professional eye. "He seems healthy, but he needs to see a pediatrician, and you need to report this to the authorities, Margaret. You can't just keep him." I know. But look at him, Dorothy. So small, so helpless. What if his mother comes back? What if she regrets it? And what if she doesn't? Are you going to raise this child knowing nothing about him? And what about your daughter? What will Jennifer say?" Margaret sighed. Jennifer, her only daughter, 23 years old, had been living in New York for 2 years, working at an advertising agency. They barely spoke these days, ever since the young woman decided to leave home right after her father's death. Jennifer has her own life. She hardly even calls. That's no excuse to make a decision like this alone. But Margaret was already attached to little Ethan. Something about this baby stirred her deeply, a connection she couldn't explain. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, they went to the police station that afternoon. The officer, Robert Johnson, a burly man in his 50s, listened carefully to the story. "You did the right thing by coming, Mrs. Wilson. We'll file a report and contact Childy. Protective services. The baby will be sent to a shelter while we look for his mother." "A shelter? But he's fine with me. I can take care of him until you find his mother." The officer shook his head. "That's not how it works, ma'am. There are protocols." Margaret felt her heart tighten. She looked down at Ethan sleeping in her arms, and a sudden determination took hold of her. "What if I want to adopt him?" "Adoption? Are you sure? It's a long bureaucratic process. And first we have to exhaust all attempts to find his biological family." I understand, but in the meantime, can he stay with me? Under temporary custody? The officer scratched his chin, thoughtful. He had known Margaret for years. She was a respectable woman, a retired teacher, the widow of Dr. Richard. I'll talk to the judge. We might be able to arrange temporary custody, but you'll have to follow all the court's orders. Margaret left the station with a small victory. Ethan would stay with her, at least for now. But little did she know that this decision would change her life in ways she could never have imagined. In the days that followed, Margaret completely transformed her routine. She woke up at dawn to feed Ethan, change diapers, gave him baths, and rocked him when he cried. Dorothy helped, teaching her the basics of caring for a newborn. "You look radiant," Dorothy remarked one afternoon as Margaret cradled Ethan in her arms. "I haven't seen you like this in a long time." "It's strange, Dorothy. I feel like he's always been mine, like he was meant to be here. Be careful not to get too attached. His mother could show up any day." But days turned into weeks and no one came forward to claim the baby. Margaret took Ethan to the pediatrician, who confirmed he was healthy, likely born full term, and no more than a week old when he was abandoned. It was then that Margaret decided to tell Jennifer. The call was tense from the start. "Mom, it's late. Is something wrong?" "Jennifer, I need to tell you something important. I found a baby on my doorstep." Silence on the other end. "What? Do you mean you found a baby?" Margaret explained everything. The temporary custody, her intention to adopt Ethan. Jennifer's silence grew until it finally erupted. "Have you lost your mind, adopting a baby at 45, alone?" "I'm not alone. I have Dorothy, I have friends." "But you don't have me, do you? You'd rather take in a stranger than try to fix things with your own daughter." "Jennifer, it's not like that. You chose to move to New York. You chose to distance yourself. I distanced myself because you suffocated me. And now this? An abandoned baby? Mom, think about what you're doing." The call ended badly, with Jennifer hanging up abruptly. Margaret held Ethan tighter, tears streaming down her face. Why couldn't her daughter understand? Why was there so much bitterness between them? The truth was, her relationship with Jennifer had never been easy. The girl had always been rebellious, especially as a teenager. At 16, she had disappeared for 3 days, leaving Margaret and Richard frantic. When she returned, she never explained where she'd been. After that, the distance between them only grew. When Richard died, Margaret had hoped they would grow closer, but the opposite happened. Jennifer blamed her mother for being overprotective, for smothering her father with care during his illness. Harsh words were spoken, old wounds reopened, and when Jennifer announced she was moving to New York, Margaret didn't have the strength to stop her. Now with Ethan in her arms, Margaret felt she had a second chance, an opportunity to be the mother she might not have been for Jennifer. The adoption process began. Margaret had to go through interviews with social workers, psychological evaluations, home visits. Everything seemed to be going well until a younger social worker, Amanda Miller, started questioning her age. "Mrs. Wilson, are you sure you'll have the energy to raise a child? When Ethan turns 18, you'll be 63. So what? I know mothers who had children at 40, even 42. What's the difference?" "The difference is, they're the biological mothers. You're choosing this responsibility." Margaret felt her blood boil but kept her composure. "I'm choosing to give love and a home to a child who was abandoned. That should be valued, not questioned." Amanda jotted something down on her clipboard, her face unreadable. Margaret realized she'd have to fight harder than she'd imagined. Meanwhile, Ethan was growing. At 2 months old, he already smiled when Margaret came near. His dark little eyes followed her around the house, and he'd calm instantly when she held him. One Sunday afternoon, Margaret was at the park with Ethan when a woman approached. She was young, probably no older than 25, with dark hair and red, tearful eyes. "Is that him?" the woman asked, staring intently at Ethan. Margaret instinctively held the baby tighter. "Him who? Do you know this child?" The woman seemed to catch herself and shook her head quickly. No, sorry. It's just, he reminded me of someone. Sorry to bother you." She hurried away, leaving Margaret with a racing heart. Could that be Ethan's mother? Why didn't she say who she was? Margaret thought about following her, but Ethan started crying, and she had to soothe him. That night, Margaret barely slept. The image of that woman wouldn't leave her mind. There was something familiar about her, but she couldn't place it. She decided to tighten security, installing cameras in front of the house. If someone was watching Ethan, she'd know. Months passed. Ethan turned 6 months old, and Margaret threw a small party with Dorothy and a few friends. The adoption process was still slow, with Amanda Miller creating obstacles at every visit. "We found an inconsistency in your documents, Mrs. Wilson. Last year's tax return." "What inconsistency? Everything's correct. There's a $100 difference between what you declared and what's documented. We'll need a correction." Margaret knew it was harassment, but she had no choice but to comply with every bureaucratic demand. Meanwhile, her love for Ethan only grew. The baby was babbling now, trying to sit up on his own, recognizing her voice even from another room. Then Jennifer called after months of silence. "Mom, can I come over this weekend?" Margaret was surprised but happy. "Of course, sweetheart, my door is always open. I want to meet the baby." Margaret's heart swelled with hope. Maybe Ethan could mend what time and hurt had torn apart. Jennifer arrived Saturday morning. She was thinner, with deep circles under her eyes and a weariness Margaret didn't remember seeing before. When she saw Ethan, now 8 months old, her eyes filled with tears. "Can I hold him?" she asked, her voice trembling. Margaret passed the baby to her daughter. Ethan, usually shy around strangers, nestled into Jennifer as if he'd known her forever. The young woman cried silently as she rocked him. "He's beautiful, Mom. So tiny still." "Jennifer, are you okay?" "You seem tired. It's work. New York is tough, you know." But Margaret sensed there was more. She knew her daughter could tell when she was hiding something. During lunch, Jennifer barely touched her food, all her attention on Ethan. "Are you really set on adopting him?" she asked suddenly. "Yes, I love this boy as if he were my own." Jennifer looked down, fiddling with her napkin. What if his mother showed up? What if she regrets it but is afraid to come back? "Jennifer, it's been 8 months. If she wanted to, she would have returned by now." "But what if she couldn't? What if there were reasons?" Margaret studied her daughter's face. There was something there, a pain she couldn't quite understand. "Sweetheart, do you know anything about Ethan's mother?" "No," Jennifer answered too quickly. "How would I know? I'm just thinking out loud." The rest of the weekend was tense. Jennifer spent hours with Ethan, singing to him, feeding him, changing his diapers with a skill that surprised Margaret. "You're good with babies," Margaret remarked. "I had a friend who had a baby young. I helped her sometimes," Jennifer explained, but she didn't meet her mother's eyes. When it was time to leave, Jennifer held Ethan for long minutes, crying softly. She kissed his forehead repeatedly, whispering something Margaret couldn't hear. "Take good care of him, Mum. Please, take good care of him." "Always, sweetheart." "He's my world now." Jennifer nodded and left, leaving Margaret with a strange feeling in her chest. Something wasn't right, but she couldn't figure out what. The following weeks brought new challenges. Ethan had his first high fever, sending Margaret into a panic. She spent the night at the hospital, holding his tiny hand while the doctors ran tests. "It's just a virus, Mrs. Wilson. Common at this age," the pediatrician reassured her. But to Margaret, every sneeze, every unusual cry was cause for worry. Dorothy tried to calm her. "You're being overprotective, Margaret. You were like this with Jennifer too. And look how that turned out. She barely speaks to me. She came to visit, didn't she? It's a start." Margaret wanted to believe that, but Jennifer's calls became scarce again. When she did answer, the conversations were brief, always asking about Ethan but avoiding talking about herself. Ethan's first birthday was approaching. Margaret planned a simple party, just for close family. Then she received an unexpected visit from Amanda Miller. "I've brought good news, Mrs. Wilson. The judge approved your adoption request." Margaret couldn't hold back her tears. After so long, so many obstacles, Ethan would officially be her son. "But," Amanda continued, and Margaret's stomach turned cold, There's been a complication. What complication? We received an anonymous tip. Someone claims to have information about Ethan's birth mother. Margaret's world seemed to stop. After a year, someone came forward with information. Who? Why now? What kind of information? The person says they know who the mother is and why she abandoned the child. The judge wants to investigate before finalizing the adoption. Margaret's legs weakened. She sat down, holding Ethan as he played on the floor. How long will this take? It depends. If the information is true, it could complicate the process. The birth mother has rights even if she abandoned the child. After Amanda left, Margaret called Dorothy in desperation. Who would do this, Dorothy? Who wants to take Ethan from me? Calm down, Margaret. It could be someone trying to help, not interfere. But Margaret couldn't calm down. She called Jennifer, but it went to voicemail. She tried several times with no success. The following days were agony. Margaret barely slept, fearing that, at any moment, someone would come to take Ethan. The baby, unaware of the drama, kept growing, taking his first steps while holding onto furniture. Then, on a rainy Thursday, Margaret received the visit that would change everything. She was feeding Ethan dinner when the doorbell rang. Opening the door, she faced a well-dressed woman in her 50s with a stern expression. "Margaret Wilson?" "Yes." "My name is Victoria Reynolds. I'm a lawyer. I represent someone who has an interest in the child under your care." Margaret's blood ran cold. "Ethan is my son. I have legal custody of him. For now. My client has information that could change this." "Who is your client? Is it his mother?" Victoria didn't answer directly. "May I come in? We need to talk." Reluctantly, Margaret let her in. Ethan, in his high chair, watched the stranger with curiosity. "Beautiful child," Victoria remarked. "He looks well cared for." "He is very loved. Now please, tell me what you want." Victoria opened the folder she was carrying and pulled out some documents. "My client knows who Ethan's biological mother is. More than that, she can prove it." "Then why not go to the police? Why come to me?" "Because the situation is delicate. Ethan's mother was a minor when she had him. There were mitigating circumstances." Margaret felt her heart race. A minor? That meant... How old was she? 16. The number echoed in Margaret's mind. 16. The same age Jennifer was when she disappeared for 3 days. No, it couldn't be. Too much of a coincidence. "My client wants to propose an agreement," Victoria continued. "She doesn't want a scandal or exposure, but she also doesn't want the child to grow up without knowing the truth." "What truth?" "Who is your client?" "I can't reveal that yet, but I can say she has proof. Birth certificates, stored DNA tests, hospital records." Margaret hugged Ethan, who had started to whimper. "What does she want?" "Visits. The right to see the child grow up, even from afar. In return, she won't interfere with the adoption. And if I refuse, then we'll have to go through legal channels. And believe me, Mrs. Wilson, my client has the resources for that. And the story that comes out could be painful for everyone involved." Victoria left her card and walked away, leaving Margaret in shock. Who was this woman? What did she know? And why couldn't Margaret stop thinking about Jennifer? That night, Margaret searched Jennifer's old room looking for any clue. She found her daughter's teenage diary, hidden at the back of the closet. She hesitated before opening it. She had always respected Jennifer's privacy. But now, the pages revealed the typical turbulence of adolescence: fights with her parents, unrequited crushes, dreams of freedom. Then in the pages from when she was 16, Margaret found something that made her stop breathing. "I'm so scared I can't tell anyone. Mom would kill me. Dad would never forgive me. What am I going to do? What am I going to do?" The next entries had been torn out, whole pages missing. Then months of silence in the diary. When the entries resumed, Jennifer wrote about feeling empty, about a secret that was eating her alive. Margaret closed the diary, her hands shaking. No, it couldn't be. Jennifer would have told her, she would have noticed. A mother always knows, doesn't she? She picked up the phone and called Jennifer's old gynecologist, Dr. Fields. She made up an excuse about needing her daughter's medical records for an insurance plan. "Let me check here. Jennifer Wilson, yes, patient since she was 14. regular appointments until… There's a gap here. From 16 to 17, she didn't. Come in for any visits. Are you sure, doctor? Absolutely. We even reached out at the time, but the mother, you, said she had switched doctors. Margaret hung up, stunned. She had never said that. Jennifer had lied, had hidden the appointments. Why? Ethan started crying in his room, pulling Margaret from her torturous thoughts. She picked him up, rocking him gently. Looking closely, was there something of Jennifer in him? The shape of his nose, maybe? The curve of his smile? No, she said aloud. I'm imagining things. But the doubt had taken root, and it grew with every passing hour. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The next day, Margaret went to Victoria Reynolds' office. She needed answers. I knew you'd come, said the lawyer, gesturing to a chair. I want the truth, the whole truth. The truth may hurt, Mrs. Wilson. I'm already hurt, please. Victoria sighed and opened a drawer, pulling out a thick folder. My client is Ethan's paternal grandmother. Margaret felt the air leave her lungs. Paternal grandmother. That meant… Who is the father? Ryan Montgomery, my client's son, Mrs. Elizabeth Montgomery. The name meant nothing to Margaret. She didn't know any Ryan. He dated Ethan's mother when they were both 16. It was a secret romance. Neither side's parents approved. When she got pregnant, she panicked. Go on, Margaret urged, her voice weak. She hid the pregnancy, wore loose clothes, avoided people. When the time came, she told her parents she was staying at a friend's house. She went to a private clinic in Saratoga Springs, where my client covered everything. She had the baby and left him on my doorstep, Margaret finished, tears streaming down her face. Not exactly. Ryan wanted to raise the child, but she refused, said it would ruin everyone's lives. She fled the clinic with the baby before discharge. Ryan and Mrs. Montgomery searched for her for days. When they found out where the baby was, with you, they decided to watch from afar. For a whole year. They saw the love you had for the child, saw he was well cared for. But now, with the adoption being finalized, Mrs. Montgomery doesn't want to lose her grandson forever. Margaret stood up, needing to move. You still haven't said her name, the mother's name. Victoria hesitated. You already know, don't you? Margaret closed her eyes. Yes, she knew. Deep down, part of her had always known. The signs were all there. The disappearance at 16, the sudden distance, the change in behavior, the way Jennifer looked at Ethan, how she held him, how she cried when saying goodbye. It's Jennifer. My daughter is Ethan's mother. Victoria nodded silently. Margaret's world collapsed. Her daughter, her little girl, had gone through a pregnancy alone, given birth alone, made the desperate decision to leave her own son on her mother's doorstep. Why? Why hadn't she trusted her? I need to talk to her, Margaret said, grabbing the phone. Mrs. Wilson, wait. But Margaret was already dialing. Jennifer answered on the third ring. Mom? Is everything okay? Jennifer, I need you to come home. Now. Mom, I'm at work. I can't. It's about Ethan, about who he really is. A long silence on the other end. Mom, I know, Jennifer. I know everything. Please come home. Jennifer's sobs were the final confirmation. Margaret hung up and collapsed into the chair, clutching Ethan tightly. Her grandson. The boy she loved as her son was her grandson. Victoria offered her a glass of water. What will you do now? I don't know. God, I don't know. Mrs. Montgomery is willing to be discreet. She just wants to be part of her grandson's life. And Ryan, the father, he's abroad studying, returns next month. He never got over what happened. Margaret left the office with Ethan, her head spinning. How had she not seen it? How had she been so blind? The signs were all there, but she'd chosen not to see them. At home, she waited. Dorothy came to keep her company, shocked by the revelations. My God, Margaret, Jennifer, how did she hide it? I failed her, Dorothy, failed as a mother. She was so afraid to tell me that she chose to go through it all alone. Don't blame yourself. Teenagers make wrong choices. But why leave the baby on my doorstep? Why not at a hospital, an orphanage? Maybe because deep down she wanted you to care for him, trusted that you'd love him. Margaret looked at Ethan, playing with his building blocks. How do you explain to a child that the woman he knew as his mother was actually his grandmother, that his real mother was someone he barely knew? Jennifer arrived in the late afternoon. She was pale, her eyes swollen from crying. When she saw Ethan, she stopped at the door, unable to enter. "Come in, dear. We need to talk." Jennifer stepped in slowly, avoiding looking at her son. Ethan, sensing the tension, began to whimper. "Can I hold him?" Jennifer asked, her voice breaking. Margaret nodded. Jennifer picked Ethan up, and he immediately calmed down, snuggling into her, as he always did. "He always knew," Jennifer whispered. "Every time he saw me, he'd be like this, as if he recognized me." "Why, Jennifer, why didn't you tell me?" Jennifer's tears fell onto Ethan's little face. "I was scared. So scared. You and Dad was so strict, so proper. Dad always talking about morals, about values. How could I tell you I was pregnant at 16? We would have understood. We would have helped." "Would you? Mom, you'd freak out if I came home 5 minutes late. Dad checked my phone every day. How could I tell you I was secretly dating? That I'd slept with someone?" Margaret swallowed hard. It was true. She and Richard had been rigid, overprotective. They'd created an environment where Jennifer didn't feel safe to make mistakes. "When I found out I was pregnant, I thought about running away. I thought about ending it, but I couldn't. Ryan wanted to take responsibility, wanted to get married, but I knew it would be a disaster. We were kids, Mom, kids playing at being adults. So you hid it. For 7 months. I wore baggy clothes, pretended to be sick when I had morning sickness. When my belly started showing too much, I said I was gaining weight, went on crazy. Diets to hide it. You were so busy with Dad's early illness that you didn't even notice," Margaret remembered. Richard had received his cancer diagnosis right when Jennifer was 16. They'd been so focused on treatments, on appointments, that they'd truly neglected their daughter. When the time came, I lied and said I was staying at Ashley's for a few days. Mrs. Elizabeth, Ryan's mother, paid for a discreet clinic. I had Ethan alone with just one nurse. It was horrible, Mom. I was so scared." Margaret stood and hugged her daughter, the 3 generations united in a tight embrace. "Why my door? Why leave him with me?" "Because I knew you'd take care of him. Because despite everything, you're a good mother. You just didn't know how to be a mother to a rebellious teenager. But with a baby, I knew you'd give him all the love you wished you'd given me differently." They cried together, Ethan between them, playing with Jennifer's hair. "What do we do now?" Margaret asked. "I don't know. I came to New York to try to forget, to start over. But I can't. I think about him every day. I dream about him every night. His paternal grandmother wants to visit." Jennifer nodded. "Mrs. Elizabeth is a good woman. She tried to help me, but I was too desperate to accept. And Ryan? He's coming back next month. We haven't spoken since that night. He must hate me. Or maybe he's hurting too." They fell silent, each lost in their thoughts. Ethan fell asleep in Jennifer's arms, oblivious to the drama around him. "Mom, do you still want to adopt him, even knowing—" "He's my grandson, Jennifer. My blood. Of course I do. The question is, what do you want?" Jennifer kissed Ethan's forehead. "I want him to be happy. I want him to have the stable childhood I had, but without the restraints. I want him to make mistakes and know he'll still be loved. We can do that together." "How?" "I live in New York. I work there. Come home, we can raise him together, grandmother and mother. It doesn't have to be a secret." Jennifer shook her head. "And what do we tell him? That his mother abandoned him. We'll tell him the truth when he's old enough to understand. That his mother loved him so much, she left him with the person who could care for him best at the time." But Jennifer wasn't convinced. The weight of what she had done was too heavy. I need to think, Mom. I need to..." She handed Ethan back to Margaret and hurried out, leaving mother and grandson alone. The following days were turbulent. Victoria Reynolds reached out again, pressing for an answer. Mrs. Elizabeth wanted to meet her grandson, wanted to be part of his life. Margaret agreed to a meeting. She took Ethan to a cafe downtown where an elegant grey-haired woman waited for them. Elizabeth Montgomery had the same determined gaze as her grandson. "He's beautiful," Elizabeth said, her eyes brimming with tears. "He has Ryan's nose." "Did you know from the beginning?" "I found out when Jennifer was 6 months along. I followed Ryan one day and saw them together. I confronted him, and he confessed everything. I tried to help, but Jennifer is stubborn. Like Ryan, they loved each other, you know, truly, but they were too young, too scared." Ethan reached his tiny hand toward Elizabeth, who held it gently. "May I visit him? You don't have to say who I am. I can just be a family friend." Margaret saw the pain in the other grandmother's eyes and nodded. "Of course. He needs all the family he can get." Elizabeth smiled gratefully. They talked for another hour, sharing stories, making plans. When they said goodbye, Margaret felt she had gained an ally. At home, she found Jennifer waiting. The young woman had been crying, her eyes red and swollen. "I've made a decision, Mom." Margaret sat beside her, Ethan in her lap. "I'm going back to Annapolis, but as his aunt. I can't be his mother, not after what I did, but I can be the aunt who loves him, who visits, who's part of his life." Jennifer: "It's the best I can offer, Mom. Please understand." Margaret hugged her daughter. It wasn't ideal, but it was a start. Ethan would have his mother nearby, even if under a different title. The following weeks were full of adjustments. Jennifer quit her job in New York and returned home. She found work at a local agency, smaller but closer to Ethan. Elizabeth began visiting regularly, always bringing gifts and affection. Ethan, naturally sociable, adored Grandma Liz, as they started calling her. Then Ryan returned from abroad. Margaret was at the park with Ethan when she saw him. Tall, dark-haired, with the same deep eyes as his son. He stopped when he saw them, his face a mix of emotions. "Mrs. Wilson?" "Ryan, I presume." He nodded, his eyes fixed on Ethan. May I come closer?" Margaret agreed. Ryan knelt near the stroller where Ethan was playing. The baby looked at him curiously, then smiled, offering his favorite toy. "Hi, champ," Ryan said, his voice choked. "I'm a family friend." Ethan babbled something unintelligible and grabbed Ryan's finger, who couldn't hold back his tears. "He's perfect. He is. Would you like to hold him?" Ryan hesitated, then nodded. He picked Ethan up with infinite care, as if he were made of glass. The baby, perhaps sensing something familiar, snuggled against him. "Jennifer?" Ryan asked. "She's at work. She came back to Annapolis. I need to talk to her. I need to understand why." "She was scared, Ryan. Both of you were. I would have taken care of them. I would have given up everything." "At 16? How?" Ryan had no answer. They sat in silence, watching Ethan explore his father's face with curious little hands. The meeting between Ryan and Jennifer happened days later at Margaret's house. It was tense, full of unspoken words and lingering hurt. "Why did you run?" Ryan asked. "Why didn't you trust me?" "Because we were kids, Ryan. Because I didn't want you to throw your life away." "Throw it away, Jennifer. You had our son alone. And you went to Europe to study like your parents wanted. It was better this way." "Better?" "I spent 2 years blaming myself, wondering where our baby was, if he was alive, if he was cared for." Margaret intervened, holding Ethan in her arms. "What matters is that now you know where he is, and he needs both of you." But the wound was too deep. Ryan and Jennifer could barely stay in the same room without arguing. Ryan's visits became separate from Jennifer's, each forming their own bond with Ethan. Ethan's first birthday arrived. Margaret organized a bigger party, with both families present. It was awkward at first, but Ethan, with his natural cheerfulness, broke the ice. Soon everyone was singing "Happy Birthday," taking pictures, celebrating the life of the little boy who had brought such different worlds together. It was during the party that Amanda Miller appeared with the final adoption papers. "Everything's ready, Mrs. Wilson. We just need your signature." Margaret looked around. Jennifer was cutting the cake. Ryan was helping Ethan open presents. Elizabeth and Dorothy were chatting animatedly. An unusual family, imperfect but real. "There's a clause here," Amanda continued, "about the biological family. They've agreed to relinquish all rights." Margaret picked up the pen, then paused. She glanced at Jennifer, who was watching nervously. "I want to add something. I want it stated that the biological family will have unrestricted visitation rights, that they'll be an integral part of Ethan's life." Amanda seemed surprised but noted the change. Margaret signed, making official what her heart already knew. Ethan was her son, but he was also a grandson, part of something bigger. The years flew by. Ethan grew up surrounded by love, calling Margaret Mom, Jennifer Aunt Jen, and Ryan Uncle Ryan. Only Elizabeth was Grandma, a little secret they kept. When Ethan turned 5, he started asking questions. "Mom, why does Aunt Jen cry sometimes when she sees me?" "Because she loves you so much, sweetheart." "And Uncle Ryan? Why does he look at me in that weird way?" Margaret knew the moment of truth was approaching. She spoke with Jennifer and Ryan, now more mature, able to be in the same room without fighting. "He's asking questions," Margaret said. "He's noticing things." "He's still too young," Jennifer argued. "Or maybe it's the right age," Ryan countered. "Before someone else tells him the wrong way." They decided to wait a little longer, but fate had other plans. It happened at school during a parent-teacher meeting when the bomb dropped. A spiteful mother, who knew the story through gossip, said loudly enough for others to hear, "Poor boy. He doesn't even know his real mother abandoned him," Ethan heard. At 5, he didn't fully understand, but he understood enough to come home crying. "Mom, what's a real mother? Aren't you my real mom?" Margaret felt her heart break. She called Jennifer and Ryan. It was time. They sat Ethan on the couch, the 4 adults around him. Margaret began, "Ethan, you know there are different kinds of families, right?" The boy nodded, still confused. "Some kids live with their mom and dad, others just with their mom or just with their dad. Others live with their grandparents or aunts. Like Joey at school, he lives with his grandma." "That's right. You, sweetheart, have a very special family, a very, very special one." Margaret took a deep breath. "I'm your grandma, Ethan. Grandma, like Grandma Liz." Ethan's eyes widened. "But you're my mom." "Yes, I'm your mom because I've taken care of you since you were tiny. But I'm also your grandma." "I don't get it." It was Jennifer, who continued, tears streaming down her face. "Ethan, I'm your mom, the mom who brought you into the world." The boy stared at her, processing. "But you're Aunt Jen." "I'm both. I'm your aunt because I couldn't be your mom when you were born." "Why?" "Because I was too young. I was only 16. I was still a kid myself." Ethan looked at Ryan. "And you?" "I'm your dad, champ. Your real dad." The silence was heavy. Ethan looked from one to the other, trying to understand. "Did you abandon me?" he asked in a small voice. "No." Jennifer and Ryan said together. "We love you," Jennifer continued. "We love you so much that we wanted the best for you. And the best was staying with Grandma Margaret, who could take proper care of you." "But why didn't you stay with me?" "Because we were too young, son," Ryan explained. "We didn't have a home, jobs, nothing. You would have suffered." Ethan began to cry, confused and scared. Margaret pulled him into her lap. "Listen, my love, it doesn't matter how our family came to be. What matters is that everyone here loves you. You have 2 grandmothers, a father, a mother, and everyone wants what's best for you. But at school, they'll make fun of me. Don't worry about others. You have a beautiful family full of love. That's what counts." Ethan stayed, quiet for a while, processing everything. Then, with the resilience typical of children, he asked, "Can I call everyone the way I always have?" "Of course," Margaret said. "Nothing changes in our daily life. But now I know I have. A father and mother too." "Exactly." Ethan nodded, seeming satisfied with the explanation. Then he jumped off Margaret's lap and went to play, leaving the adults emotionally exhausted. The adjustment wasn't easy. Ethan had nightmares, asked tough questions, tested boundaries. But with child therapy and lots of love, he gradually understood his unique story. At school, they faced prejudice. Some mothers whispered, some children repeated cruel things they'd heard at home. But Ethan, with his family's support, learned to take pride in his story. "I have two grandmothers, a father and a mother," he'd say. "I'm lucky." Little by little, Ryan and Jennifer found their place in their son's life, not as traditional parents, but as constant, loving presences. Ryan took him to soccer. Jennifer helped with homework. Margaret remained his day-to-day mother, but now with the support of a strong family network. When Ethan turned 10, he wrote a school essay about family. His teacher shared it with Margaret, moved. "My family is different, but it's the best in the world. My grandma Margaret raised me since I was a baby, so she's also my mom. My mother Jennifer had me when she was very young, so she's also my aunt. My father Ryan is always there for me. Even if he lives in another house, my grandma Liz makes the best cakes. Everyone loves me and I love everyone. It doesn't matter how a family starts. What matters is the love in it." Margaret cried as she read it. They had done it. Despite everything, they'd raised a secure, loved child. The years kept passing. Jennifer finally forgave herself, met a good man named Charles and got married. She gave Ethan two siblings, Sophia and Peter. Ethan adored being the protective, caring big brother. Ryan also moved forward. He married Julie, and they had a daughter, Lauren. Ethan gained another sister, more love in his ever-growing life. Margaret aged gracefully, always the center of this unconventional family. When Ethan graduated high school, he made sure to thank her. "Grandma Margaret, mother of my heart, thank you for taking me in that night, for never giving up on me, for creating our crazy, beautiful family." At the graduation dinner, everyone was there. Margaret, Jennifer, and Charles with the kids, Ryan and Julie with Lauren, Elizabeth, Dorothy. A big, loud table full of love. Ethan went on to study medicine. He wanted to specialize in pediatrics, inspired by the care he'd received as a child. During college, he met Amber, a sweet young woman who understood and embraced his complex family. It was at a Sunday lunch with Ethan, now 22, that he announced, "Amber and I are getting married." Joy filled the room. Once again, the family grew, expanded, welcomed new members. During wedding preparations, Ethan had a long talk with Jennifer. "Mom, I want you to walk me down the aisle. You and Grandma Margaret," Jennifer cried. "But Ethan, you're my mother. You always were, even when you were Aunt Jenny. I want both of you leading me to the altar. It was a beautiful wedding." Ethan walked in, flanked by Margaret and Jennifer, both radiant. Ryan waited at the altar as the best man, emotional. Elizabeth wept in the front row, the whole family celebrating another chapter. In his speech, Ethan said, "I grew up hearing my family was different, it's true, but different doesn't mean wrong, it means unique. I was privileged to be loved by many, to have diverse role models, to understand that family isn't about blood or conventions. It's about choice, choosing to love, choosing to stay, choosing to forgive. My mother Jennifer chose to give me the best life possible, even if it meant letting go of raising me. My grandmother Margaret chose to love me as her son. My father Ryan chose to be present. They all chose to build this web of love that brought me here. Amber, now it's your turn to choose to join this madness. Welcome to the family." 2 years later, Ethan and Amber welcomed their first child, Richard, named after the grandfather he'd never meet. When Margaret held her great-grandson for the first time, the circle was complete. "Look at this," she told Jennifer. 4 generations. Here, Jennifer, now 45, the same age Margaret had been when she found Ethan, smiled. "Thank you, Mom, for everything. For not giving up on me even when I gave up on myself. For loving Ethan when I couldn't. For building this family." Margaret kissed her daughter's forehead. "I just loved. The rest, you all built." That afternoon, with the house full of laughter, children running, overlapping conversations, Margaret remembered that rainy night 24 years earlier. The faint cry at the door, the wicker basket, the abandoned baby who would change all their lives. Ethan, now a father himself, approached with Richard in his arms. "Grandma, tell him the story of how you found me?" Margaret smiled. It was a story she'd told hundreds of times, but she never tired of it. It was a rainy night in Annapolis. And so the story continued. passed down through generations. A story of love, forgiveness, and family. A story that began with abandonment and ended with abundance. A story proving happy endings exist, even when the path is winding. Ethan grew up to become a respected pediatrician, specializing in abandoned and at-risk babies. He created a program at the local hospital to support teen mothers, offering medical and psychological care. Jennifer, inspired by her own story, began working in social services, helping young pregnant women find alternatives. She lost count of how many Jennifers she'd helped over the years. Ryan established a scholarship foundation for young parents wanting to continue their education. He never forgot how hard it was to finish college carrying the weight of the son he couldn't raise. Elizabeth, the quiet matriarch, lived to see great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, always present, always supportive. And Margaret? Margaret lived to 92, lucid until the end. On her deathbed, surrounded by the family she'd built, she held Ethan's hand. "It was worth it, my son. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt. Look at what we built." Ethan, now 47, streaks of gray appearing in his hair, kissed the hand of the woman who'd chosen to be his mother. "Thank you for choosing me that night, Mom. Thank you for not letting me go." Margaret smiled, her eyes closing slowly. "I didn't choose you, Ethan. You chose me. Your mother knew exactly where to leave you. She knew I needed you as much as you needed me." With those words, Margaret passed, leaving a legacy of love that would endure for generations. At her funeral, hundreds came. Family, friends, dozens of young people she'd helped over the years, each with a story, each touched by the woman who turned abandonment into love. In his final speech, Ethan said, "My grandmother, my mother, taught me family isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's about saying yes when it would be easier to say no. It's about opening the door, both literally and figuratively, to the unexpected. 47 years ago, she opened the door and found a baby. She could have closed it, called the authorities, followed protocol, but she chose love. And that choice echoed through the decades, creating waves of kindness that touched hundreds of lives. May we all have the courage to open our doors to the unexpected, to say yes to love even when it comes in forms we don't expect." Life went on, as it always does. Ethan and Amber had 2 more children. Jennifer and Charles watched their children grow and start families of their own. Ryan and Julie became young grandparents. And somewhere in Annapolis, on rainy nights, Ethan still passes by the house where it all began. The house was sold after Margaret's death, but he stops in front of it, remembering. One night, 50 years after that fateful evening, Ethan was returning from the hospital when his phone rang. It was the hospital security guard. "Dr. Ethan, you need to come back. We found something at the entrance." Ethan rushed back. There, at the hospital entrance, was a basket. Inside, a newborn baby wrapped in a pink blanket. History was repeating itself. Ethan carefully picked up the baby, tears streaming down his face. He looked up at the starry sky and whispered, "I see it, Grandma. I see it." He took the baby inside, cared for her, followed the protocols. But deep in his heart, he already knew this child had come to him for a reason. The cycle continued. He called Amber. "Honey, remember when we talked about adopting?" "Ethan, what happened?" "Life, my love, life happened again." And so, 50 years later, another abandoned child found a home. Another act of despair turned into love. Another unlikely family was born. Ethan raised little Lily with the same love he had received. He told her her story, the story of her great-grandmother Margaret, of Jennifer's courage, of the love of a family that refused to be defined by conventions. Lily grew up strong, secure, loved. She became a social worker, like her grandmother Jennifer. She carried on the work, helping other Lilies, other Ethans, find their place in the world. And in every child helped, in every family reunited, in every act of unconditional love, Margaret's spirit lived on. The woman who, on a rainy night, chose love over fear, compassion over protocol, family over convention. Because in the end, that's what this story was about. Not the initial abandonment, but the choice that followed. The choice to love, to stay, to turn tragedy into triumph. Ethan, now at the end of his own journey, gathered the family to tell the story one more time. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all listening intently. "It all started on a rainy night," he said, his voice shaky with age but strong with conviction, "when a brave woman opened the door and found not just a baby but a purpose. She found not just a child but an entire family waiting to be born. That woman taught me that love knows no conventional forms. That family is who we choose to love, that second chances exist, that forgiveness heals, that time reveals truths fear hides." He looked around at the beloved faces, each one part of this complex tapestry woven over decades. "My birth mother left me at the right door. My heart's mother welcomed me at the right time. My father waited for the right moment to return. They all made hard choices out of love. And that's who we are, a family born from hard choices, strengthened by forgiveness, bound by unconditional love." Little Lily, now a great-grandmother herself, held Ethan's hand. "Grandpa, do you think great-great-grandma Margaret knew that by taking you in, she was creating all this?" Ethan smiled, his eyes wet. "I think she knew she was saying yes to love, Lily. And when we say yes to love, we never know where it will lead. But it's always, always worth it." That night, Ethan passed away peacefully, surrounded by generations of love. The last thing he saw was Amber's face, still beautiful at 85, and the faces of all those he loved. Somewhere, Margaret was smiling. The abandoned girl had become a matriarch. The act of despair had become a legacy of hope. What began with a cry in the night had turned into a symphony of love across generations. And in Annapolis, in a certain house overlooking the mountains, a discreet plaque read, "Margaret Wilson Foundation, where every child finds a family." Inside, dozens of volunteers worked to unite abandoned children with loving families, to support struggling mothers, to ensure no child grew up without love. The cycle continued. Love endured. Family, in all its imperfect and beautiful forms, triumphed. And somewhere, a frightened young woman with a baby in her arms saw the foundation's announcement and found hope. Somewhere, a childless woman opened her heart to a child in need. Somewhere, the miracle of that rainy night repeated itself time and again, love after love. Because this is the final truth of Ethan and Margaret's story. Love planted with courage blooms for generations. What seems like an end may be a beginning. What seems like abandonment may be the first step of an extraordinary journey. And every child, no matter how they come into this world, deserves to find their place in a family, deserves to be chosen, loved, celebrated. This was the true identity Ethan discovered 20 years later. Not just that he was the grandson of the woman he thought was his mother. Not just that he was the son of the woman he thought was his aunt, but that he was part of something greater. A love story that defied conventions, overcame obstacles, and proved that family is above all a daily choice to love. The end of the story. And so we come to the end of this moving journey. Tell me, do you believe love can transform any situation? Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know if you too know stories of families formed in unconventional ways. If this touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe for more heartfelt stories.